The story begins not in the clear daylight of history, but in the twilight corridors where truth and myth weave together like smoke in a temple's inner sanctum. Imagine an ancient library, its walls of sandstone darkened by centuries of incense and flame. Here the air itself seems to hold memory, and each scroll and codex breathes with the pulse of civilizations long gone. It is in such places buried beneath the dust of empires that the first whispers of the Gnostics emerge. Their name Gnostikoi simply means those who know, but their knowing was not the knowledge of scholars or priests. It was the knowledge of direct vision, of truth seen without the veil of human interpretation. They walked a perilous path, one that demanded the seeker turn inward and pierce the illusions of the world. In the marketplaces of Alexandria, in the candlelit rooms of Antioch, in the hidden gatherings by the Nile, their teachings moved like an underground river, invisible yet shaping the earth above. To understand the Gnostics, one must step into their world, a world where the cosmos itself was a labyrinth of symbols, where the stars were not distant suns, but luminous gateways, and where the soul was a fragment of divine fire, trapped in the gears of a false reality. Theirs was a story that began long before Christ, before Greece, even before Babylon, a story whispered in the stone circles of the megalith builders and carved into the obsidian altars of forgotten gods. Yet, the Gnostics were not merely inheritors of ancient fragments, they were alchemists of truth, distillers of the ineffable. From Egyptian mystery rites, from the chants of Persian magi, from the silent meditations of desert hermits, they gathered the scattered jewels of wisdom and set them into a vision that defied the powers of their age. But to speak such truths was to invite danger, for the empires of both sword and scripture could not tolerate a teaching that placed divine authority within the soul itself. And so they spoke in riddles, clothed their wisdom in myth, and met beneath the shadow of the moon. They told of an unseen realm beyond the stars, the pleroma, the fullness of divine being, where infinite light dwelt before it fell into the shadow of matter. They told, too, of the demiurge, a blind craftsman god, worshipped by the unknowing, who spun the prison of the world from his own ignorance. And within these myths lay not mere allegory, but maps for those who would dare to find the road home. The seeker stands now at the edge of this path, feeling the weight of the veil before their eyes. It is thin enough to sense the radiance beyond, but thick enough to obscure its form. The first step is not to tear it away, but to recognize its threads of history, its knots of belief, its warp and weft of fear and hope. Only then can one begin to pass through. The journey has only begun, and already the air feels charged, as if the ancient library itself leans in to listen. Beyond this threshold wakes the deeper memory of the Gnostics, their origins, their initiations, and the forbidden fire they carried through the ages. To follow the Gnostic trail is to walk backward through a corridor lined with shattered idols and faded constellations, each a remnant of a world that once claimed to hold the truth. The corridor narrows, the air grows heavy, and we find ourselves stepping into an age when the sky was still the great scripture, and the earth was a temple without walls. Here, the Gnostic seed first took root, not as a religion, but as an echo of something older, something that had no name, long before the word Gnostic was ever uttered. The ancients told of a primordial unity, a boundless light from which all things emerged. In the dawn lands of Sumer and Akkad, the priests whispered of Anu's celestial vault and Enki's deep waters, of divine realms layered like steps of a ziggurat. In Egypt, under the gaze of the falcon god Horus, initiates learned that the soul was a fragment of the solar bark, a passenger on its eternal voyage through night and day. In the fire temples of Persia, the Magi guarded the mystery of the two lights, one pure and eternal, the other corrupted and bound in matter. These were not separate visions, but different tongues describing the same celestial map. Over centuries, They mingled like streams joining a greater river, until somewhere in the shifting sands of time, a synthesis began to form a way of seeing that would later be called gnosis. It was during the Age of Empire, when Rome's shadow stretched across the Mediterranean, that this ancient current found new life. The great port city of Alexandria became its crucible, a place where Greek philosophy, Egyptian priestcraft, Hebrew mysticism, and Babylonian astrology met in the taverns, the marketplaces, and the hidden chambers of scholars. Here, a seeker might study Plato's forms in the morning, the Torah in the afternoon, and by night be initiated into rites that traced their lineage to temples buried in the desert's heart. But the Gnostics did not merely collect teachings, they transmuted them. From Plato's dialogues, they took the vision of a higher unseen reality. From Egypt, they absorbed the language of soul's ascent and the rituals of spiritual rebirth. From the Persians came the stark vision of cosmic duality, light and shadow, spirit and matter. From the Hebrews, they drew the concept of a hidden God, too vast to be named, whose truth could never be contained in any earthly law. And yet, something in the Gnostic vision diverged sharply from the orthodoxies around them, where priests and emperors taught obedience to the gods of this world. The Gnostics saw those gods as jailers, rulers of the material prison, where others spoke of salvation through sacrifice and law. They spoke of liberation through awakening, of returning to the source not by piety, but by remembering one's true nature. In the dim-lit chambers of Alexandria, amid the scent of myrrh and the murmur of waves from the harbor, initiates would hear the secret that the human soul was a spark of the infinite, trapped in a false creation spun by the demiurge and his archons. This was the forbidden truth, the knowledge that would set them at odds with both temple and throne. And so, from the woven threads of countless traditions, the Gnostics began to spin their own tapestry. It was luminous, yet dangerous to behold, for in its patterns were truths that could unmake the illusions of the world. It was a fire that could either guide the traveler home or burn the unprepared to ash. The origins have been glimpsed, but to truly understand the Gnostics, we must pass beyond their beginnings and into the heart of their teachings, the labyrinth of myth where the pleroma, the demiurge, and the soul's exile are revealed in full. The Gnostic vision of the universe is not the simple creation story of a benevolent God shaping a flawless world. It is a theater of vast proportions, a layered cosmos where light and shadow contend in silence across eons. To step into it is to enter a myth that feels at once ancient and unsettlingly familiar, as though the soul remembers it from before birth. They speak first of the pleroma, the fullness, a boundless sea of living light. Here, there is no division, no time, no desire, only the eternal harmony of the source, an ineffable presence beyond names, beyond even the concept of being. From this ocean of pure spirit emanate the eons, luminous beings of thought and will, each an aspect of the unknowable God. They are not gods in the way mortals understand, but living archetypes, justice, wisdom, truth radiating endlessly from the heart of the infinite. Among them is Sophia, the Aeon of divine wisdom. She is the central figure in the Gnostic myth, the one whose longing to know the source in its totality sets the cosmic drama in motion. In her desire to grasp the infinite without her counterpart, she acts alone, a bold act that sends ripples through the pleroma. From her yearning and overreach, a distortion emerges, a shadow of creation not born in harmony. That shadow takes form as the demiurge, a blind craftsman unaware of the pleroma from which he ultimately descends. He fashions the material cosmos, believing himself the sole God, shaping worlds and weaving laws without understanding the higher reality. Around him gather the archons, cosmic wardens who enforce the prison walls of matter and mind. They are not merely mythic villains, they are the forces that bind the human spirit to illusion, fear, ignorance, desire, and the intoxication of false power. In the Gnostic telling, our world is the demiurge's masterpiece. intricate, dazzling, and flawed. It is a mirror that reflects the higher realms, yet distorts their light like water broken by ripples. Souls, sparks of the infinite, fall into this realm, clothed in flesh and bound by forgetfulness. We awaken here as exiles who have forgotten their home. But Sophia does not abandon her children. Through secret messengers, veiled visions, and moments of sudden piercing insight, she plants seeds of remembrance in the human heart. These moments are the first stirrings of gnosis, a wordless recognition that we are more than the world allows us to believe. In the temple gatherings of the Gnostics, this cosmic drama was not mere allegory, it was a map for the soul's journey. To know the pleroma is to begin the ascent, to pierce the illusions of the archons, and slip past their watchful eyes. The seeker learns that salvation is not the forgiveness of sins imposed by earthly rulers, but the breaking of the chain of rebirth, the return to the source. The myth of Sophia and the demiurge is the heart of the Gnostic worldview, a reminder that the light within us is not of this world, and that the world itself is a shadow of something far greater. But myth alone is not enough. The seeker must walk the path. The next step lies in the initiatory rites, the living rituals by which the Gnostics sought to awaken the divine spark and guide it upward through the cosmic gates. In the hidden circles of the Gnostics, the telling of the cosmic myth was only the beginning. To hear the story was to awaken, to live it was to ascend. The rites of the Gnostic path were not ceremonies meant to please the gods of this world, but navigational key spiritual mechanisms designed to guide the soul past the sentinels of the demiurge and back into the radiant realms of the pleroma. These rites unfolded not in grand temples open to the masses, but in secret gatherings, candlelit chambers beneath the streets of Alexandria, deserted villas in the Judean hills, or lonely caves along the Nile where the sound of the river mingled with whispered prayers. The air was thick with myrrh and spikenard, their scents carrying the initiate's mind into that liminal state between waking and dream. The initiation began with the catharsis, a purifying of the inner temple. The seeker was not merely cleansed in water, as in common baptism, but bathed in silent hours, sometimes days, without speech, fasting until the mind's noise grew still. Only then was the sacred formula whispered into their ear, a sequence of words not meant for the uninitiated, a cipher of sounds designed to awaken the dormant memory of the soul. This was followed by the mystikos dromos, the mystical journey. The initiate, guided by a master, would enact in symbolic form the soul's ascent through the planetary spheres. Each ruled by an archon. One by one, these guardians would challenge the traveler, each demanding a password, a sign, or the surrender of a worldly attachment. To pass Saturn's gate, the initiate might relinquish pride to pass Venus's, the bonds of lust and desire to pass Mars's, the hunger for domination. In some schools, this ascent was dramatized through ritual death and rebirth, the initiate lying in a stone sarcophagus, surrounded by the chanting of fellow adepts, until a moment came when the inner vision broke open, a flash of memory so vivid it felt like the soul was momentarily free of the flesh. In that vision, the initiate might see Sophia's light beckoning from beyond the last veil, or hear the voice of the true Father calling them by a name they had forgotten since the dawn of time. The rites were both symbolic and real. Symbolic, because they mirrored the soul's journey through the cosmos. Real, because they altered the initiate's consciousness, loosening the bonds of the archons in ways invisible to the eyes of the world. When the rite was complete, the seeker emerged changed not in body, but in the way they perceived the very fabric of reality. Yet the path of ascent was not a single event, it was a lifelong work, a continual stripping away of illusion, a vigilance against the snares of the lower realms. The archons, the Gnostics warned, are cunning. They do not merely guard the gates of heaven. They weave the very thoughts that convince a soul to remain in bondage. Thus prepared, the initiate stepped back into the outer world, knowing that each act of remembrance, each moment of gnosis, was another step upward through the spheres. But the rites of ascent also carried with them a dangerous power, the ability to see the world as it truly is, a knowledge that could set one free or mark one for destruction. For in the age of empire, to speak openly of the demiurge's deception was to challenge the very order of the world. It is here, in this collision between forbidden knowledge and imperial power, that the Gnostics would face their greatest trial, the long shadow of persecution and the attempt to erase their light from history. The world into which the Gnostics spoke their truths was ruled by gods of power, thrones of iron, and altars built on obedience. In such a world, their teachings were as dangerous as fire in a dry field, for the Gnostics did not merely question the idols of stone and gold, they questioned the very God proclaimed by empires, calling him not the creator, but the jailer. At first, their gatherings passed unnoticed, hidden in the labyrinthine quarters of cities, blending with other sects and philosophers in the noisy marketplaces of the Mediterranean. But the scent of their heresy, this whisper that the God of the Old Testament might be the blind demiurge, began to draw the attention of the watchful. Priests, both pagan and Christian, found common cause in their opposition, for the Gnostic doctrine threatened the foundations of both temple and church. The storm gathered slowly, then struck with calculated precision. Edicts were proclaimed, Gnostic writings, those fragile vessels of forbidden light, were hunted down and burned. The voices that carried the myth of Sophia and the secret of the Pleroma were silenced by law, by prison, and by the sword. The first blows came from the rising Christian orthodoxy in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Bishops like Irenaeus of Lyon and Tertullian of Carthage wrote vast treatises against the Gnostics, denouncing them as corrupters, their teachings as poison. The Church, seeking unity, could not abide the labyrinth of Gnostic visions, where salvation was a solitary ascent, not a collective submission. Yet it was not only the Church that opposed them. The Roman state, ever wary of movements that fostered divided loyalties, saw in the Gnostics a dangerous independent citizens who bowed neither to Caesar nor to the official gods. In their eyes, the Gnostics were agents of disquiet, sowing seeds of dissent by teaching that the rulers of this world were but archons, shadows of true authority. The persecution was relentless. But the Gnostics had learned from the eons that survival was not always in open defiance, but in concealment. They vanished into the deserts of Egypt, their scriptures hidden in clay jars and buried in the sand. They took their rites into remote valleys, their myths into the coded language of symbols and allegory. The Nag Hammadi codices, discovered in our age, are among the few surviving relics of this time, silent witnesses to a war fought not with armies, but with memory and forgetting. In this war, the empire's victory was not the destruction of the Gnostics' bodies, but the attempted erasure of their thought. To be forgotten is a deeper death than to be killed. And yet, even as the great fire of persecution seemed to consume them, embers remained carried in secret from teacher to student, hidden in the folds of other philosophies, encrypted in alchemical texts, hermetic treatises, and even in the stained glass and stone carvings of later centuries. The war against the light seemed to end with their disappearance from history's stage. But the Gnostics understood something their enemies did not, that truth is not bound to ink or parchment. It can sleep in the silence of centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And rise it would, not in the cities that had cast them out, but in the solitude of the desert, where the sand keeps its secrets well. It is into that desert that we must now follow the trail, to the places where the last Gnostic masters kept their vigil, guarding the flame until the world was ready to see it again. The world into which the Gnostics spoke their truths was ruled by gods of power, thrones of iron, and altars built on obedience. In such a world, Their teachings were as dangerous as fire in a dry field, for the Gnostics did not merely question the idols of stone and gold, they questioned the very God proclaimed by empires, calling him not the creator, but the jailer. At first, their gatherings passed unnoticed, hidden in the labyrinthine quarters of cities, blending with other sects and philosophers in the noisy marketplaces of the Mediterranean. But the scent of their heresy, this whisper that the God of the Old Testament might be the blind demiurge, began to draw the attention of the watchful. Priests, both pagan and Christian, found common cause in their opposition, for the Gnostic doctrine threatened the foundations of both temple and church. The storm gathered slowly, then struck with calculated precision. Edicts were proclaimed, Gnostic writings, those fragile vessels of forbidden light, were hunted down and burned. The voices that carried the myth of Sophia and the secret of the Pleroma were silenced by law, by prison, and by the sword. The first blows came from the rising Christian orthodoxy in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Bishops like Irenaeus of Lyon and Tertullian of Carthage wrote vast treatises against the Gnostics, denouncing them as corrupters, their teachings as poison. The Church, seeking unity, could not abide the labyrinth of Gnostic visions, where salvation was a solitary ascent, not a collective submission. Yet it was not only the Church that opposed them. The Roman state, ever wary of movements that fostered divided loyalties, saw in the Gnostics a dangerous independent citizens who bowed neither to Caesar nor to the official gods. In their eyes, the Gnostics were agents of disquiet, sowing seeds of dissent by teaching that the rulers of this world were but archons, shadows of true authority. The persecution was relentless. But the Gnostics had learned from the Aeons that survival was not always in open defiance, but in concealment. They vanished into the deserts of Egypt, their scriptures hidden in clay jars and buried in the sand. They took their rites into remote valleys, their myths into the coded language of symbols and allegory. The Nag Hammadi codices, discovered in our age, are among the few surviving relics of this time, silent witnesses to a war fought not with armies, but with memory and forgetting. In this war, the empire's victory was not the destruction of the Gnostics' bodies, but the attempted erasure of their thought. To be forgotten is a deeper death than to be killed. And yet, even as the great fire of persecution seemed to consume them, embers remained, carried in secret from teacher to student, hidden in the folds of other philosophies, encrypted in alchemical texts, hermetic treatises, and even in the stained glass and stone carvings of later centuries. The war against the light seemed to end with their disappearance from history's stage. But the Gnostics understood something their enemies did not, that truth is not bound to ink or parchment. It can sleep in the silence of centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And rise it would, not in the cities that had cast them out, but in the solitude of the desert, where the sand keeps its secrets well. It is into that desert that we must now follow the trail, to the places where the last Gnostic masters kept their vigil, guarding the flame until the world was ready to see it again. It began, as many great revelations do, not with the sound of trumpets or the gathering of multitudes, but with the strike of a peasant's shovel into the dry earth in 1945. Near the village of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a group of farmers digging for fertilizer struck Kleinot stone. Inside the jar they unearthed lay the breath of a forgotten age, 13 leather-bound codices, their pages of brittle papyrus sealed away since the 4th century. The find was almost accidental. Yet in the Gnostic vision, there are no true accidents, only the slow turning of the cosmic wheel until the appointed moment. These codices, long buried to escape the purges of the early church, were more than ancient manuscripts. They were the voices of the desert keepers, speaking again after 1,500 years of silence. Scholars would later call them the Nag Hammadi Library, but to the initiated, they were something else entirely, a fragmented map to the lost kingdom within. Among them was the Apocryphon of John, a masterwork of Gnostic cosmology, laying bare the myth of the Pleroma Sophia and the Demiurge with crystalline force. There was the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus not as the Messiah of dogma, but as the revealer of hidden knowledge, declaring that the kingdom is inside you, and it is outside you. Other texts defied simple categorization, the thunder, perfect mind, a hymn in the voice of the eternal feminine, at once exalting and paradoxical. The Gospel of Philip, weaving mystical insight with sacramental symbolism, and treatises of Hermetic and Platonic origin, revealing the threads between Gnostic vision and the broader tapestry of ancient esotericism. When the translations began to circulate, the modern world was startled. For centuries, the Gnostics had been known only through the writings of their enemies, distorted, vilified, reduced to a footnote in the triumph of orthodoxy. Now their own words emerged from the sands, unmediated, unrepentant, and burning with a clarity that cut across time. The reaction was as divided as it had been in antiquity. Scholars debated whether these were the remnants of a heresy or the relics of a deeper, original Christianity. Mystics and seekers felt in them the pulse of an older, more dangerous spirituality, one that offered no easy answers, only the call to awaken. Institutions, as always, met the revelation with caution, for the Gnostic message undermines all forms of centralized authority. Yet something irreversible had happened. The hidden word had returned to the world stage, its embers fanned into flame in the hearts of those who recognized its voice. From lecture halls to secret study circles, from academic presses to whispered readings in candlelight, the codices began their second life, and with them returned the old challenge. Would the seeker dare to act upon what they had learned, to walk the path inward and upward, past the rulers of this world? The final step of our journey lies not in the past, but in the present, where the Gnostic vision meets our own age and the timeless struggle between light and shadow unfolds anew. The rediscovery of the Nag Hammadi texts was not the end of the Gnostic journey, it was the turning of a key in a lock that had held for centuries. Once opened, the ancient current began to flow again, slipping past the gates of both academia and orthodoxy, reaching seekers scattered across the world. Yet, as in ages past, the Gnostic message came not as a doctrine to be memorized, but as a summons to inner rebellion. In the modern age, the Demiurge's prison wears different masks. No longer only the temples and thrones of empire, it takes form in the glow of screens, the machinery of commerce, the hypnotic rhythm of mass culture. The archons, the ancient wardens, now speak in the language of algorithms, advertising, and ideology, still weaving the enchantment that keeps the soul asleep. The Gnostic recognizes these not as mere social forces, but as the same ancient powers that once held sway over kings and priests. Yet the same technology that serves the archons can also, paradoxically, serve the seekers. The hidden word spreads, now through networks undreamed of by the desert keepers, carried in encrypted manuscripts, online communities, quiet correspondence between those who have felt the stirring of the spark. For some, a single passage from the Gospel of Thomas or a vision drawn from the thunder. Perfect mind becomes the seed that splits the stone of their reality. Modern Gnostics are not bound by geography. They gather in the shadows of great cities, in mountain hermitages, or in the quiet sanctuary of their own minds. The rites of ascent may be reimagined, but the path remains the same, the stripping away of illusion, the passage through the spheres, the reclamation of the divine birthright. Hidden in the heart, in place of oil lamps and desert stars, they may use meditation, dream work, symbolic art, or the language of quantum physics to glimpse the pleroma, but the essence does not change, and still, the old danger remains. The Gnostic knows that too. See through the veil is to live in two worlds at once, the outer world of the Demiurge's design and the inner world of the true source. This dual vision brings both liberation and alienation, for once the spark is awakened, the illusions of the world lose their hold, yet the world itself continues to demand submission. The Gnostic flame in the modern age burns quietly, without banners or armies. It is not a movement that seeks domination, but an undercurrent that seeks recognition in those ready to receive it. In the unseen depths of human consciousness, it continues the work of Sophia calling, reminding, guiding the exiled soul toward its return, and so the journey comes full circle. The library of light, once hidden beneath desert sands, is now dispersed across the minds of living seekers. The same choice stands as it did 2,000 years ago, to remain within the glittering illusion, or to turn inward, face the cosmic gates, and walk the narrow road home. The pleroma waits not far away in space, but here, within the silent center of being. The path of the Gnostics was never a path of conquest, but of remembrance. And for those who answer its call, the veil will one day lift, and the exiled spark will return to the eternal sea of light from which it first came.